Facilitation training for community assemblies. So let's give you a quick overview. The session's going to run for about an hour and a half, but we're going to try and be quicker because I know everybody has many things to do. So we're going to give you a quick introduction to community assemblies, but I think pretty much most of you have probably been to one of the previous community assembly calls already, so you probably already have a fair idea. Explain why we're doing community assemblies in XR. So we'll explain quickly the escalation plan. And then we're going to talk about the role of the facilitator in a community assembly. We'll do a fun active listening exercise, which you can all take part in. And then we're going to run through the running of the community assembly. So the information you need before the assembly starts, things that happen during the assembly that you'll be looking at. We'll have a little break. Then we'll look at how to deal with difficult interactions. And then we want to leave plenty of time for you to not only ask questions, but also share some of your experience as well. Lots of you will have probably already done some facilitating. We've got the lovely Denise, Steve, and Dandelion as well from the also from the Community Assemblies project group, who also have lots of experience with this already as well, so they'll be able to input too. So we're hoping to make it a nice and interactive session as well, so you don't just have me and Kathy talking at you all the time. So community assemblies, so it's very confusing, especially if you're in Extinction Rebellion, because we have lots of different assemblies flying around and people are getting very confused. So we're trying very hard to clear that up. So we're going to talk about two different kinds of assemblies today: citizens assemblies on the one hand, and specifically community assemblies, which is going to be our focus of this session. But we want to talk about citizens' assemblies because obviously the Citizens' Assembly on Climate and Ecological Justice is our third demand. So you'll hear that term a lot in Extinction Rebellion, and also citizens' assemblies are becoming more popular. So you'll be hearing that term more often. Both of them are forms of deliberative democracy. And literally all that means is that it's a kind of democracy that centers around deliberation, which means around talking, listening, learning from each other. So not the aggressive, oppositional shouting at each other that we currently see in our electoral political system. Both of them are forms of group deliberation. So it's all about collective intelligence, working together to resolve an issue. And both of these are also informed by experts, stakeholders, and people with lived experiences. So with stakeholders, what we tend to mean is groups who have an interest in the outcome of the assembly. So for example, if you were to do something about cycle lanes in your local borough, then you would probably have quite an active cyclist group who they would be a stakeholder, but also the anti-group, so the pro-car group, for example, they tend to get quite upset about cycle lanes. So they would be a stakeholder as well. And lots of other groups in between. You probably have mums about air pollution, or a residents association, or the local shop owners if the cycle lane goes through a shopping street. So things like that, they are what we refer to as the stakeholders. So basically groups that have an interest in the outcome. And then also people with lived experiences. So in a cycle lane, that could be someone who's, for example, had an accident because there was no cycle lane, that sort of thing. There could be a person with lived experiences. Now, the difference is that a citizens' assembly is a very robust, rigorous process with some basic standards, like minimum standards, and it runs through a process called sortition, which literally means it's selected by lottery, very much like our jury service in the UK. But then the sample is sorted into a representative group that represents the UK or a city or, you know, a region as a whole. Whereas a community assembly is most likely self-selected. So it's people who want to come to it and they will come. although we are looking at a way of doing a similar sort of sortition process for community assemblies, so that you can have a slightly more randomly selected group, but we're sort of working on that now. I think the assemblies that are happening at the moment are self-selected, but they're doing lots of effort. They're putting lots of effort into trying to make their group as diverse as possible in terms of demographics, but also in terms of sentiment around the issue. So pro cycle lane, against cycle lane, that sort of thing. Citizens' assemblies are meant to be long. We would really say a minimum of 10 days, ideally more, because the people of a citizens' assembly get a lot of information. You want them to have lots of time to learn, to ask questions, and then deliberate and make their decisions. Whereas a community assembly can really be much shorter. It's a lot less of an official process. It doesn't mean that it's any less valuable, but it just means that you're more easily to get people to come along, obviously, because you're only asking them for a day, or maybe even as little as 90 minutes or an evening, rather than, you know, several weekends. Both of them are meant to inform policy, although with a community assembly, we can also use them as movement building tools. So we can also use them to learn from each other, rather than there has to be an outcome that gets presented to the council, for example. So they're slightly different in that way. So why is a climate and ecological activist, non-violent direct action group talking about community assemblies? Lots of people find it quite random. They think, but you guys are all about gluing yourself to stuff and chaining yourself to stuff. Why are you doing this democracy thing? Well, there's good reason for that. Obviously, we have our third demand, which is a form of deliberative democracy, which we really want people to understand and support by experiencing deliberative democracy themselves. Even if it's not through an official citizens' assembly, if they can experience it through a community assembly, they still get that feel of learning, deliberating, changing their minds, changing it back again, that whole process. We really feel that people who experience that are much more passionate about the process and will be really good advocates for that, for it to be taken on. But it's also part of the XR strategy, because it's also a great way to build relationships with people and groups outside of the XR bubble, as we like to call it. So it means that you go to your local residents association or housing association or your local environmental groups and say, would you guys like to organize a community assembly with us about, you know, an environmental issue in the borough or in the city or in the parish? And that way you've got a project to work on together. And we find that that always is a much better foundation for building relationships, rather than saying, come to our event, but that is actually you're working together on a mutual project, and that builds relationships and trust, which is really what we need to push for change on the climate and ecological emergency and other issues as well. And it's just a brilliant way of tackling local issues together. You know, there's all these controversial issues going on in local communities, low traffic neighborhoods, like I said, cycle lanes, green spaces that are being lost, old trees that are being cut down, all these kinds of things that are really local issues that people are very, very passionate about, that you can, as a group, come to solutions for these issues. So this is why, these are the three reasons why we are doing community assemblies.
We value reflecting and learning, and that's one of XR's values. And I'm going to talk about the role of the main facilitator. And the main facilitator really is like a master of ceremonies. They explain the process, overseeing that everyone has everything they need, knows what they're supposed to be doing, and really make sure that everything runs smoothly. So that's a responsibility for the overall running of the assembly, for timekeeping, for the delivery of all relevant information. The main facilitator deals with tensions should they arise and ensures accessibility for all participants. And the recommendation is that, you know, there are at least 2 main facilitators and possibly an extra as an assembly note taker. And if you do, it's really good to aim to have diversity in these 2 facilitators in terms of gender, age, ethnicity, where is possible, so that you are going to connect with a wider group of people. The main facilitators don't actually generally facilitate the small groups, which we will talk about a little bit later when the deliberation phase starts, but they are the main facilitators are responsible for the running of the entire process on the day, be it a morning, an evening, or a whole day. Some of them are whole day events. But it's good to roam around and oversee as a main facilitator what's happening in the room. It's, if possible, it's really good. I mean, it also depends on sort of what sort of availability you have from people. But an assembly note taker is really an important role. It could be another person, or it could be one of the main facilitators. And they're responsible for recording the results of the feeding back that happens in the integration phase of the assembly. And then also responsible for feeding the assembly results into wherever they're destined to go. It could be as a centralized results online, or into a presentation that's going to be made to the council, or whatever it is. The decision of what is generated in the assembly needs to be clearly defined before the start and clearly communicated to the assembly. And this would be done, it isn't really, that's the role of the planning committee, the people who plan the process, not necessarily the facilitator. So now what we're going to do, a little bit an active listening exercise. We're going to do this now, but if you were doing an actual community assembly, you would do this sort of exercise after explaining the 3 pillars. So we're going to, Mariah's going to do this, I certainly couldn't, going to divide you into pairs, into breakout rooms. And each participant, so you'll be in pairs, will talk for 3 minutes about why they care about community assemblies. Remember to listen from the heart, hugging with your full attention, that the speaker speaks from the heart, and your experience and feelings about something, about how you feel about the question, and which is community assemblies, why they matter to me. You're going to support the person you're listening to with your non-verbal behavior, so that somebody really feels you really are listening and not looking elsewhere. Don't interrupt. No questions other than tell me more, or a similar open question. But also it's all right for there to be moments of silence. Listening creates a safe space, and it helps people feel respected and honoured. And active listening is an expression of another of XR's values, which is we welcome everyone and every part of everyone. So you're going to be, if she can do the magic, Mariah, you're going to be divided into pairs. We'll give you 6 minutes. So if you could amongst yourselves swap over after 3 minutes. So we're going to bring you back in 6 minutes back into the main room.
Welcome back, everybody, from your breakout rooms, from your active listening exercise. Kathy, do you want to carry on?
Would anybody like to share how that was for them? Liz, great.
Yeah, it was very interesting, very rewarding. It was nice to hear from somebody from the other end of the country to me, having very, very similar views. At one time, we both, without any prompting, both shook our heads. I think it was about the present government and politics. But yes, it was very good, very rewarding.
Thank you, Liz. Anybody else? Don't feel you have to. Oh, great, Diane.
Yeah, I was with Steve, and it was interesting because Steve has got a bit more experience, but he's still with cities, community assemblies, and I felt he was sort of knew quite a lot. But I put my timer on, and it started going off when Steve was talking, so I was trying to stop it because I put the three minutes on and it wouldn't stop. So I sort of, I thought, I hope we're not going to feed back and say accurately what someone said. I think I got the gist of it.
Well done. I hope you didn't talk too much longer, because timing as a facilitator, as a main facilitator, or even a small group, timing is really important. Nandi, did you have your finger up, your hand up? Oh, no.
No, I was just scratching my head.
Oh. Alan.
Alan, yeah.
Hello there. Yeah, we had a pretty good one. Me and James, who'd met at the weekend at a march in the southwest in Bath. So we had a good chat about that. But it was also really interesting to hear about James' experience in Cornwall, which sounded he was quite amazed at how impressive these things can be. So that sort of geared me up to think much more about it. Yes.
Great. I mean, I think you can tell it is really very rewarding, even if you don't want to come back to the whole group, to actually speak from the heart and listen, really concentrate on listening to somebody else, that you have a really much stronger connection than if you're looking at your phone or something else at the same time. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Mariah. He's going to do the first bit, and then she's going to hand back to me. We always feel that at least two voices are better than one.
Yeah, and also I was going to say, actually, with active listening, I always find like it takes this pressure off, because your job is literally to listen, and not in society we're so used to you're supposed to like come up with something clever to say, and you almost forget listening. You forget to listen to the other person because you're so worried about what you're going to say next. And I love active listening, because it doesn't matter what you are going to say. What matters is that you are listening to whoever's talking. And I always find that quite a relief, actually, to be able to just concentrate on the other person and not worry about my big head. We are going to talk about running the community assembly. So you, as the facilitator, have either been helping organize the community assembly, or you've been asked to come and facilitate the assembly. So it is now your job, as Kathy calls it, you're now the master of ceremonies. You are going to run the day or the hour or however long it's going to be. So there is some information that you definitely do need before the assembly starts, and it's kind of key that you yourself have that little checklist, so that you don't end up standing in front of a room of 50 people and suddenly realize, oh, I don't have this. So some of the things that are really, really useful for you to have are that you're clear on the timings of the stages of the process. So the input, the deliberation, and the integration. We'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. So timings is key. Also, what's often really embarrassing is if you don't know the names and the roles of the speakers. So you just know them by Jim, but you don't know, like, you want to be able to be respectful and introduce them properly. So their full name, if they want to give it, obviously, and like a little bio. What are they? What are they presenting about? What is their area of expertise? You know, John Doe about air pollution, or, you know, blah blah, a mother part of lungs for London, or whatever it is. You know, it's just nice to be able to properly introduce your speakers. So make sure that you have those details from the organizers before you start. Ensure that the organisers of the community assembly have the question for the assembly written up somewhere really clearly visible, and that you can keep pointing and referring to it, because even if it's a simple question, people do just forget, like, what was the question again? You want it written down somewhere. It could be as simple as a big sheet of paper hanging up on the wall, or if there's a whiteboard or something like that, just make sure that the question is up there for everyone to see. So make sure that you have all the materials that you're going to need. So, for example, big pieces of paper and pens or markers for the note takers once the breakout groups start during the deliberation phase. Also, you might need chairs. You know, in XR, we're so used to sitting on the floors, not the most inclusive way of doing things, because sometimes people can't sit on the floor. So make sure that you have chairs for people to sit on, tables for people to write on, that it's all nicely set up so that you can get going. Then make sure, this sounds really obvious, but you know, the amount of times that we forget these kind of practical things, make sure you have the details for housekeeping. So things like the location of emergency exits, where the loos are, when there's going to be breaks, are there points of water, where can people get water, or maybe there'll be some coffee and tea and some biscuits. So these are all nice things to point out as well. Check things like, if you're in a room, you know, temperature, does someone need the window to be open? Does the window need to be closed? That kind of thing. Make sure that everyone feels comfortable. And make sure you have something to keep time with. So it can be your phone. Sometimes in the space you're in, there'll be a clock on the wall somewhere, or if you have a watch, just make sure that whatever you do, you're not standing there without any measure of keeping time. So those would be really the key things that you need before you even get started. So now we're going to go to during the assembly. Kathy.
I'm muted. So during the assembly, the facilitators, the main facilitators, open the assembly and they welcome very warmly all the participants. Some people will feel a bit strange because they might not have experienced something like this before. Then when people are comfortable, you introduce yourselves, and in much the way as Mariah and I did, and so they know who you are and to call upon you if they need any support. You make them housekeeping announcements, as Mariah pointed out, so that's the emergency exit, the location of loos, and identify if there are other needs. However, things like sign language and accessibility, all that should have been sorted out already by the organisers during the planning phase. So that should all be put in place where necessary, but that's down to the planning rather than you as a facilitator. So it's up to you as the facilitator to introduce the topic or the question of the assembly. We're here today and all that information should have been given to you, and you should be comfortable being able to explain it. But it's always good to ask for any clarification at this point, and be open perhaps to working to reword the question if needed. The next thing that's really important to ensure smooth running, to ensure that people aren't shouting out, it's something that people within XR are now quite familiar with, and that is hand signals. And it's really useful to use in all sorts of deliberative situations. So to make a point, your index finger is pointed up, and the facilitator, that's you, will stack your notice. you'll notice who's got their finger up, and you can choose to stack out of order. So if there are some people who keep putting their finger up to speak, you can do it out of order in order to ensure there's a radical inclusivity, and that some people are quick off the mark and others less. A direct point, index finger on each hand is pointing up. This isn't for responding, it's just for adding any extra information that you might have in relation to something that's just been said. And be very careful not to abuse this one. I think I get accused of doing that a little bit too often. Agreement, wavy hands. And this actually is a great help to the note taker because it gives them an indication of the feeling in the room. And make sure you're not, to help the note taker, make sure you're not interrupting when you wave your hands. Clarification, create a C. I don't know if I got it the right way round for you. If you haven't understood something, if you wanted something to be explained that you haven't understood. Technical point, like that, is to announce something like breaks, or if the fire alarm's going off and you need to evacuate, or some sort of emergency, you do a technical point. Rounding up, that's a nice round thing when somebody goes on for a little bit too long, and however interesting it might be, we have to allow space for everybody to be able to speak. So we do a little round up. Speak up. Some people might have difficulty hearing, and some people have quieter voices. That can be dealt with earlier on by, if people do know they have difficulty hearing, to position themselves where they can hear more clearly. But this is a way to ask people to raise their voice, to speak up. Quiet. This works very well. You put your arm up and everybody in the room is quiet. Temperature check. This is when you jiggle your fingers at a level that corresponds with feelings, i.e. upwards is the support. If you're not quite sure, you put it in the middle somewhere. And if you definitely don't agree, you put your fingers down. And we'll come to that when a bit later on, and we'll just do a little modeling of it, because not everybody will be familiar with that. So we're going to move on now to the 3 pillars.
Yes, so there are 3 pillars to a community assembly, and that is radical inclusivity, active listening, which you've just done, and trusting the process. So what this means is that, so radical inclusivity, before the assembly, you let the people know so that this is happening. So who are the missing voices? And this is really not, it's also for the facilitators, but it's also for the organizers. So before the facilitator even comes into the picture, the organizers have thought about radical inclusivity. So especially if it's a self-selected assembly, you would think about, how do we make sure that we don't just get the usual suspects coming to this assembly? How do we make sure that people who wouldn't normally raise their opinion about this issue, how can we make sure that they are included? But also, how do we make sure that space is accessible with disabled access? How do we make sure there's provision for children, for example, if someone might not be able to come, if there's no facility for childcare? Also comfort for older members of the community. So that is all about the planning of the assembly, but you as the facilitator also need to bear this in mind, that when you see people coming in and you see that, for example, they can't see because the chairs have been moved around, or the chairs have been moved around so that there's now no more space for a wheelchair to come along, that you as the facilitator just keep an eye on that and make sure that everyone can get in and that everything is working and functioning and accessible. But the organizers will have set up most of that for you already. It's just a good idea to keep an eye on that. Then as a facilitator, what you want to make sure is that no one voice dominates. You want to make sure that everybody's heard. So you can say to people, just make sure before you start speaking that you think about, why am I talking? Do I have to say something right now? And again, that's what the active listening exercise is really useful for as well. So you can gently manage this by using something along the lines of, before we take a second question or comment from you, can we make sure that we hear from people who haven't spoken yet? So if this is someone who keeps putting their hand up, you'll know that the people, you know, who are always like, I want to say this and I want to add that, and see if you can ask other people if they have something to say. And often a little prompt gives people that confidence to think, oh, okay, I can actually ask things as well. So you can say, let's have a space for those who haven't spoken yet, for example. As a facilitator, you can see if there are any barriers to engagement. So there should be facilities already in place for people who are hard of hearing, for example, but make sure that the equipment works, or that if there is someone doing sign language, that the person doing the sign language can actually be seen properly by everyone. So even though that has already been organized, you as a facilitator can still make sure that that is all happening and people are able to see and to hear. Remind people to speak up or wait for the mic when there's questions. And then we read the inclusivity statement. So it's always a really good idea to read this out when the whole assembly is there and that they all hear it. You as the facilitator don't have to read it out yourself necessarily. Maybe one of the organizers wants to read it out, or you could even get, you know, someone else to read it out for you. But basically it goes like this. We value all voices equally in the assembly, as the aim is to hear the wisdom of the crowd gathered here and not to have the assembly dominated by individual voices or groups. We recognize that confident speakers are not always right, and that those who are not confident speakers will often have the most useful ideas or opinions to put into the discussion. This is why we value all voices equally, and we ask you to do the same. We do not tolerate any calling out, abuse, or shaming, and should conflicts arise in this way, there is a conflict resolution process in place to resolve this. We welcome all people, but not all behaviors. So yeah, that is the inclusivity statement. So it's always a good idea to have that read out before you start with the assembly. And then, well, we've just done the active listening, so that is the second pillar. So active listening within the assembly context allows the possibility of learning and having our minds changed. So a community assembly isn't an arena for intellectual jousting and invite facilitators to watch for people's fingers going up as soon as someone starts speaking, an indicator that they are concentrating on their own response rather than actively engaging and actively listening to what's being said. And that's usually, you would do an active listening exercise at the start of the assembly as well. So it's just all about making sure that people concentrate and listen and don't think already about what they want to say or what they want to raise. And then third, which is so important as well, and we see this so much, is trust the process. Often people are like, yeah, but why aren't we doing it like this? Or shouldn't we be doing that? This is a process that's been thought out by people much more clever than me that have already done lots of experimentation with this. It's been changed and improved, and this is the process. So trust the assembly process, trust the facilitators, trust each other, the participants, and the self-organizing system of the assembly. So facilitators maintain trust by sticking to the agreed process. So make sure that you don't deviate from the process that was agreed. If someone doesn't has something to say or wants something done differently, you can deal with that as and when and say, please, we really ask you to take part in this process. We really ask you to trust this process to ensure that it moves along smoothly and ensure radical inclusivity as well. So yeah, Kathy, do you want to talk again about how to run an active listening session?
So after we've talked to the assembly about the 3 pillars, then it would be the moment when you'd run an active listening session, and I mean, a good thing to start really for people in a first community assembly would be maybe to turn to somebody and talk about themselves, like we did, but about themselves for 3 minutes each. And then they can also turn around. This is something that is often done. You need to work out sometimes what you think will work best with the people that you're with. They can then turn around to another person and talk to them about something that they've been told by the person that they were listening to. And I think it's really important constantly in a community assembly to remind people it's about sharing as openly as you can, remembering to listen carefully with your full attention. Don't think about what you're going to say, don't interrupt, and to also acknowledge that really quite important, silences are okay. You know, we can be comfortable in silences. We don't actually, it's all right. There's no right or wrong, and there's no way to do it. You don't have to talk constantly for 3 minutes if it doesn't work, it doesn't flow. So you could ask, they could talk about themselves, or they could ask, you could ask them to talk about what brought them there, what brings them here today. After that is when you have the inputs phase, and this is when you introduce the speakers, and you're there, master of ceremonies, making sure they keep to their allotted time slot, because it really isn't fair if one gets more time than another. And you should give them a 1-minute warning and agree the gesture that you will do to show them that they have 1 minute left. If I was at home, I've got a lovely Buddhist sound bowl that I would have demonstrated, but I'm not at home. So, but it's really nice maybe not to sort of shout out, is maybe just have a musical instrument of some sort. So I'm going to have a go on my granddaughter's little, so you could do something like that to indicate that time is, they've got 1 minute left, rather than shouting out time or whatever. So allow for questions at the end or whatever was agreed with the organisers, but you need to really hold this input space pretty tightly to ensure that no discussion happens at this stage, just questions to the speakers, because we want to save the discussion and the deliberation for the next phase. Something that really is testifying is to testify is a really good way to start to move people into that space where they're going to talk, be able to talk to other people. So you invite people to take the microphone for 2 minutes maximum and share their feelings about what brought them to join the assembly or action that day. And that can last a varying amount of time. Sometimes you have quite a lot of people who are very keen to talk, and sometimes you don't, but just you feel your way through it, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but not for it to go on too long. So we've listened to the input. And then it moves into the deliberation phase. So as a facilitator, what you're going to do is explain what is going to happen before you divide them up into groups, because people, if you divide people up into groups, they move into the groups, and then you explain what's going to happen. You've lost attention and people get distracted moving about. But you will explain that once they're in their groups, they will need to, somebody needs to volunteer to be a group facilitator. This is a different role. It's just within the small group of about 6 to 8 people. And the group facilitator facilitates the discussion using the hand signals. You tell them they're going to be using the hand signals and that it's their job to ensure no one dominates, to keep an eye on the time, and to maintain radical inclusivity and active listening, and that everybody adheres to the inclusivity statement. So each small group needs a facilitator and also a note taker. And the note taker summarizes the most popular points, summarizes really in as clearly, as near as possible as what was stated by the person who made the points. Don't analyze, synthesize, or interpret, don't change what they say. We recommend using bullet points. And look for, you know, in a group, if somebody says something that other people think, oh, yeah, that's really good, they often do the wavy hand to show that they're in agreement, and the note taker can pick up on this. And note takers are the person usually, but not always, who report back to the large group. Some people volunteer to note take, and then when they discover that, you know, they're meant to also go back to the main assembly and speak, they not comfortable with that. So they need to know that beforehand, but also it doesn't have to be them. If they're really good at doing note takers, it'd be great to have them taking the notes and somebody else can feed back. So this is generally the case, but some community assemblies now are looking to have trained facilitators, and we'll be providing them. And so you would need to explain, you wouldn't have to go into the whole role of the small group facilitator if your assembly is going to provide them. Small groups are deciding what feedback to bring to the main group. That's what you're going to explain, that this is what they're going to do. They're going to have to, after they've had their discussion, decide what to bring back to the main group. And you explain how they will narrow down all their suggestions to 2 or 3 main points, which are representative of the group. Maybe the note taker will then present to the main assembly after the deliberation is done. So it is to narrow down the points. We don't really do voting. To narrow down the points, you can do a temperature check on each point, and the points with the most support get taken back to the main group. So somebody said to me that they ran a community assembly, and that the people who attended weren't really sure what a temperature check meant. But as I showed you before, it was hands up, you're in agreement, not too sure, ambivalent in the middle, and if you definitely don't agree, with your fingers down. So you could model a temperature check at this point. You could say to them, do you like apple pie, or should we burn energy by colonizing Mars, and see what people's responses, so they get the idea. And as a facilitator, explaining to the people before they go into these small groups, you need to explain how many points each group can feed back to the main group. This is usually around 1 or 2 points, but I think this does vary. I've heard, and somebody else I was speaking to said they reported about 3, and how that feedback will happen. So how many, if you've got a really large community assembly, you might not want them all feeding back 3 main points, because that will take a lot of time. So you might want to narrow that down 1 or 2, depending on the number of breakout groups. So you will then, before they go into their small groups, you will also just recap the hand signals and clarify how long it's going to take. How long? Usually it's a minimum of about 45 minutes deliberation, with 10 minutes a 10-minute warning for them to put together their final points that they want to take back to the main assembly. So you need to decide how many breakout groups. You want to ensure that each group has 6 to 8 people in it. You will have done this more or less before the assembly starts, when you have an idea how many people have turned up. So, for example, if there are 100 participants, you will need about 12 groups to ensure there are 8 people in each group. So how do we divide them into groups? We don't really want people to stay in the little clusters that they came with their friends. We hope that by now people have begun to feel a bit comfortable with what they're going to be doing, and that the idea is that they'll be talking to people that they might not be talking to normally. And so what you do is you make people count off from 1 to the final number of groups, and then from 1 to 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you say, number 1s, could you go over here? Number 2s, and you allocate a space in the room, in your venue, whatever it is. Then they will speak with, they will deliberate with the facilitator, the note taker, and then you will give a 10-minute warning for them to move into the integration phase. So they're going to pull together the points they want to take back. Then the next stage is integration. The assembly facilitators, the main facilitators, call the breakout group note takers to the front of the assembly. And each note taker gives the feedback summary to the whole assembly. And as they're put up, as they're fed in, assembly members can use wavy hands to indicate their support. So one of the main assembly facilitators, or preferably if you have a separate person, a note taker for the entire group, is what we need. If you haven't got a note taker, one of the assembly facilitators is the note taker for the large assembly. And you're seeking to find the consensus, to see during this integration, to see if any common themes are emerging. So it's very likely in a large group that there'll be repetitions of a single point of view that might be fed back. Different groups have the same 1 or 2 or 3 main points. And in order to avoid repeating them all, you can just put a tally. In sticking them up or writing them up, you can put a tally on a piece of paper. So the assembly note taker records the points that get the most overall approval from the entire assembly, or just records the points as they are fed back. That's something that you would, the organising group, you would decide how you want it done. It's nice to do this on a whiteboard or a large piece of paper so the assembly participants can see it. One community assembly recently had a projector on the wall and the points were typed in from a computer so everybody could see. Or each group, you could have asked each, this is something I thought about afterwards, is you could ask each group to write their top 1 or 2 or however many are going to be fed back onto a piece of card, and that card can be just stuck on a chart, so that in fact means that the main note taker who's receiving all these points doesn't have to write everything up. Anyway, it will depend on the context and your resources. And I'm sure there's somebody on this call who would be able to tell you other more techie ways of, I'm afraid I'm not that person, but perhaps somebody might share that afterwards. So the assembly note taker verifies at the end, checks the points, and ensures that the assembly agrees with the output. So the assembly then, you would sort of narrow it down to about 3 main, well, you decide. It depends on the contents, the question, and where it's going, how many points you want to carry forward. And so then the assembly note taker feeds the results to the destination, which is whatever that may be, and will have been explained at the beginning, but it could be a central online results like Polis, or it could be the local council. But this it needs to be determined prior to the assembly, and will have formed part of the framing of the process in the input phase. So then you close the assembly when everybody looks at their results. Maybe there's going to be a cup of tea, a glass of wine. You thank everyone for coming. You thank the organisers. And before you do that final thank you, you need to sort of explain again what will happen with the results. Sometimes it can just be for the coming together of different groups in the community, and how you're going to go forward together. It might not necessarily be anything to go to the council. So dealing with difficult interactions, I think undoubtedly sometimes this comes up. I did hear recently of one in which somebody who actually presented, who was a presenter and made input into this assembly, then joined a small group and then actually tried to dominate that group. So I think the learning from that is you don't have anybody who does input actually taking part in the small group deliberation. So we have to remember that we welcome all people, but not all behaviours. And it's up to us as facilitators to move in when people are interjecting, challenging, or talking too much, and to make it obvious that we need to have equal sharing and hear from others. So it's thanking them for their input, and then to try and find the positive intention of their behaviour. You know, what are they seeking to achieve that is positive? So it's good to explain the situation. You can use different, here's some examples to say to people that I'm conscious of time in our agenda. What's the final point that you actually wanted to make? You can talk about radical inclusivity, that we want time for everyone. And we can point out it's important for people to feel listened to without interrupting. You can offer to talk to them in more detail in a break afterwards, because if you need someone to behave differently, it can actually be an expression of radical inclusion to connect with them in a break or afterwards, to keep in relationship with them, rather than just sort of shutting them out, shutting them down, because their behavior isn't working in a fluid way with the group. And sometimes with someone who is very unconsciously in need of attention and can't be satisfied with a short interaction, avoiding eye contact may keep them quiet or let them know they've been talking for too long. And so anyway, if necessary, it's always fine to overtly clarify the objectives of the session again and what is needed to achieve those objectives. And again, we welcome all people, but not all behaviours. Maybe there's somebody here who has had to deal with difficult behaviour and they can add some points. But now I think we're going to go to questions.
Oh yes, Diane. I think you were first.
Yes, I was unclear when, I think you're talking about when it was in the small group, that the facilitator or the small group facilitator reflects back what the person has said. Did I get that right, or were you talking about something entirely different? If someone makes a point, does the small group facilitator have to sort of summarize it or reflect it back? Or...
No, not in the small group. No, the facilitators are really in the small group is mainly there to make sure that everybody has a turn and that timing is kept to it. The note taker will make the points and they will be what people have actually said, rather than you're not trying to summarize it in a way that you do, that facilitators do in meetings.
The report, the repeating it back to someone can be really useful in an active listening exercise to make sure that people are actually listening to each other. So you could use that, but Ahmed.
Yeah, in the inclusivity statement, you mentioned that there is a resolution process. Did I get that right? So it says conflict resolution process. There is a conflict resolution process. Is that something which is a part of the job of the facilitator, or is that something different totally? I'm just not very clear what this process is.
Yeah, I'd say that would really need to be the job of the people organizing. Sometimes one of the facilitators is also part of the organizing group. But yeah, that's definitely something that should be discussed and put in place before the assembly starts. So there's lots of different examples. At what stage is someone so disruptive that you ask them to leave, like that sort of stuff. That all should be discussed and agreed on by the organizing group well before the assembly, and then they would inform the facilitator what that process is and support them with that as well. So yeah, that's definitely, if you're going to be the main facilitator, you wouldn't be expected to sort of come up with that on the spot, although I've seen lots of incredible facilitators who literally just do it right there and then, and so if you're super experienced, then yeah, great, but otherwise I would advise that the organizing body has that prepared for you in advance.
Just to ask Marine, perhaps is there somewhere where we can direct people to see the conflict resolution procedure, to give us an example? I don't know of any, so I was just wondering.
Yeah, there are. So we'll after this session, won't be straight away because obviously I need to add the missing slides, but we'll be sending you the slides and resources as well, which will include this conflict resolution stuff and more stuff for facilitators, and links and videos and stuff like that. So that will all be coming your way as well. Alan?
A couple of points, if I may. One on the group facilitators. That seems quite a key role. Their ability to accurately report back on what the group's discussed. So, would you plant somebody in each group, one of perhaps your own team, that's organising the whole thing, or just try and trust that to whoever volunteers in each group?
Yeah, it's trust. That you need to trust the people, you trust the process, you trust the participants. Otherwise, it's not a really good environment, a good situation to start off with. But I mean, the facilitator, the note taker, is the one who takes down the different points that people make.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I think I meant the note taker. Yeah.
The note taker, they take it, and it's supposed to be more or less about main words that people actually said. and they don't change them. And people in that group will be aware of it. They're there they can oversee them themselves. And yes, I think.
Okay. Our second point then was on the timing. How long do you think you give for the group discussions? I expect the speakers by experts, etc., could take as long as many as you've got, but for the actual group discussion,
I think normally it's a minimum 45 minutes. With it could depend. It could depend on your topic. The question. Oh, well, I've got somebody here who's got more experience than me. Denise, would you like to answer that one, please? Thank you.
Yeah, there's a kind of rough rule of thirds. So for the input phase, a third of the time that you've got allotted for the whole assembly, for the inputs, the speakers, then for the deliberation, another third. Obviously, this is not hard and fast, but that would be a general rule to go by. And then your integration phase is the final third of the time that you've got left.
Thank you.
Lynn, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, it's really about how focused or how narrow the question should be. Does it work better if it's really clear cut? Or how does this format work for something that's kind of broader or more about a bigger challenge? Or is it more about, specifically what should we do on, these trees in this area? Or is it about, how should we develop, how, as a group, what would we like to see for trees, as an example? So what works best?
So luckily for whoever the facilitator is, that is not up to the facilitator to decide. That should have already been decided way before the assembly happens. So that's not something for the facilitator at all. They just have to make sure that the process, that people keep, the question is written up on the wall somewhere and they keep referring them back to it.
But it was a question anyway, if you're the organizer and the facilitator.
Yeah. So it's the best thing is usually to make it an active question. So how might we, or how will we together ... It's often best not to have like a yes or no question, like cycle lane or no cycle lane, but how might we expand active travel in the borough or something like that. And then the question, you need to make sure that whatever the question is you're asking, that whoever you want to implement the recommendations, that they actually have the power to implement those things. So if you were to say do something about meat tax, that is nothing your council can do anything about, even if they wanted to. That is something on the Westminster level. So if you're thinking about doing something in your local council, then you need to really figure out what powers do they actually have. And then you can make it fairly specific, because the deliberation around it will widen out anyway. If it's about a cycle lane, it will become about air pollution, it will become about climate, so it will expand anyway. So it's good to make it fairly specific, but not restrictive in terms of a date or a number or anything like that, but that it can be about a very specific thing, an LTN or a low traffic neighborhood, or a park where a developer is going to build a flat or things like that. It can be quite specific. I think that's quite useful, and it will evolve. Denise?
Yeah, I think there's also an element of it depends is part of the answer here, because it depends on which other groups you're working with to organise your assembly, what's important to all of those groups. So like Marijn said, you've got that question figured out fairly early in the process. Once you start consulting and working with allies, a question will start to formulate itself. And The other thing is, you know, asking yourself, what do you want to achieve from this assembly? And it can be quite narrow focused. If it's broad, that's fine. It just means that it will probably generate further assemblies where you'll start to focus on particular aspects. So yeah, it really all depends.
Yeah, and I'd say if you rock up to an assembly without a question, you're allowed to go on strike, because that is not fair to you as a facilitator. But yeah, that would change your job a lot. Liz, your question or comment?
Yeah, it's a clarification really, because I'm sort of trying to visualize what's happening. And I think Kathy, was it said that somebody from the group of 8 is going to be a note taker, and somebody from the group of 8 is going to be a facilitator, but those people will not be able to participate, as I understand it, in the actual discussion, or will they? That's the question really. I'd sort of got in my head that the organisers would provide the facilitators and the note takers, but that didn't seem to be what you were saying, Kathy. Just for clarification, how will that work?
Steve, do you want to take it? I could see your hand going up, but otherwise, Kathy?
Yeah, I think a lot of these questions are a function of what you're aiming the assembly at, what you want to do it for. So I can only quote what we're trying to do with our assembly, which is in December. We want to win the local council over, to incorporate these events as a regular feature of the local democratic process. So therefore, we framed a very general question about biodiversity, because biodiversity is not implicitly contentious. Like being in London, if we said this is an assembly about air quality and we got into ULEZ, we could probably expect some, you know, almost punch-ups in the room with the people who would turn up in those circumstances. So we're trying to avoid that, make it something that we can align ourselves with the council and give them address things which are in the council's power to deliver on, so that we can get a positive outcome, and we can build confidence with them that they should do this in the future. And it kind of things fall into place as a result of that. So for instance, we're selling our assembly as having no activists among the participants. So we're not ourselves, Friends of the Earth and the Green Party, who are organising it, are not putting up people to come to the assembly. We're asking our members not to come in that capacity. And therefore, we're providing from our ranks, we're providing the facilitators and the note takers for each breakout group. And in doing that, we're not going to express any opinions at all. That's our instruction to our facilitators and note takers. So we're strictly neutral. We just enable the conversations to happen and capture the conclusions. But as I say, that's a function of how we've set our assembly up and what we hope to achieve with it, if you like. So it goes a long way back before the kind of things answer themselves as you progress through the details of the organisation.
I think it also depends on your resources, you know, what you have available, because, you know, if you're not going to go ahead with a community assembly because you haven't got enough trained facilitators, that would be a great shame. I think the role of the facilitator, I think the facilitator could input, and the note taker could input, could take part, as they do in a people's assembly. They do take part, and they're not fully trained. It's just very spontaneous. It's somebody volunteering to do it. It's just making sure the main role is to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak, and that, you know, and that some people don't speak for too long. It's mainly overseeing that, I think, and the note takers take down the points. But, you know, at the end of the day, it'd be great to have independent note takers and facilitators if you've got sufficient resources and sufficient people able to do it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a Yeah, you can do both. It depends on your resources, as Kathy says. Alex.
Well, I just wanted to add to that. So if you don't have lots of people who could do note taking, you can use one way of doing note taking is to write them on post-it. So write each point on a different post-it, and that means that people can more easily do the notes, and then you can actually cluster them more easily. So if you don't have lots of people who can take notes, that's one way of enabling people to sort of do their own note taking and to gather those notes together. And then you can sort of, you don't necessarily have to have one person who's doing it all, because it can be quite a difficult job to write everything down as opposed to collecting notes that other people have written. So that's one way that people, that's good to do. And the upside of doing that is that you have people's actual words, what they've said, rather than a version of what you've written down. So it saves a lot of time. And it gives people a sense of being heard. So it gives them, it's useful in that sense too. They don't feel like they've been interpreted, which is kind of important.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Alex. So much power in a tiny little post-it. But yeah, we incidentally took a workshop last week where there was lots of post-it usage, and we loved it a lot. So yeah. And so I would just say, again, coming back to the role of the facilitator, the main facilitator is, as Kathy said before, is that you do walk around. This isn't sort of your 45 minutes of having a cup of tea and a biscuit. You're still going to be very active, helping the group, seeing if they get stuck. They'll have lots of questions for you. So this is where you're really supporting them and sort of flitting around each group and helping them out. So yeah, we've gone over by only 6 minutes, which for me and Kathy is quite a miracle. So do we have any further questions or comments? Okay, great. That's lovely. In that case, I'm going to say thank you so much for coming.